this is industry perspectives on the combo product guidance. It should probably be called James's perspectives and a few other folks. The industry perspective is much broader and includes probably a lot of people in this room, a lot of people online, and thousands of others. But these are just a few items that a lot of us who are reading the guidance and talking over the last few weeks have noted. And I think before I sort of get into the details of it, I think first of all, I think FDA should be applauded for the detail that it went into in the guidance. I think that there's a lot of meat in there. It's a really good guidance in terms of the level of detail and the examples. I think the three examples they provide in terms of specific combination products are 12 pages long, and they really sort of go through how you deal with design controls, for prefilled syringes and drug-coated meshes and drug-coated stents. And it's really, I think it's really impressive. So I think overall the guidance has a lot of good points. And so here, we try to highlight that, and also some areas where I think there could be some additional clarity provided going forward. And that's just a nice picture of me. There are sort of four areas that I wanted to focus on. I didn't hit reserve samples, which is good because I think we hit that pretty well this morning in the Q&A, and I think we'll probably hit it more again at 3:30. But I wanted to hit on three big topics that we talked a lot about, amongst a group of us that were working on the presentation yesterday. Design controls, convenience kits, and the issue of relationships. If you're a like marketing authorization holder and you're coordinating multiple parties, what your responsibilities are. And then just a sort of a hodgepodge of different topics, areas that were helpful, and areas where additional clarification might also be helpful. And then I was just going to say a couple brief words about the case studies, though I think Brad hit on a lot of that this morning as well. So just on design controls, one thing we really liked about the guidance was, in the format here, I try to take excerpts from the guidance. I know this is a little bit text heavy, but I just really wanted to pull out some language that seemed really good to us. And the sort of the concept and the theme that's recurring through the guidance is the idea of leveraging existing information and sort of not reinventing the wheel. And that's I think a really positive and progressive forward-looking approach. It's appropriate to leverage existing data in developing a design history file for a combo product that wasn't developed under design controls. That's a great statement. And I think some of the examples that were listed in the guidance on page 19 about using existing specifications to develop design inputs, using previous testing that was performed to serve as design, validation, verification, documentation, and not needing to prepare a development plan or design review meetings, because obviously if the product's already on the market, that phase is done, and you shouldn't have to go through that activity if there's no point to it. I think that's really, really good to just sort of see in writing, and it's a nice progressive forward-looking approach to how you deal with it and how you sort of backfill in your design history file so you can start moving forward under design controls with combination products as changes come with the product. I think, though, one area that might be helpful for additional clarification would be more specificity and perhaps some additional mapping of CGMPs or specific NDA information or that sort of information that one would see in an application into specific requirements for a design history file. And this is just sort of an example. And again, I had mentioned right off the bat, I really like the examples in the guidance, and I think those could actually be leveraged for this sort of activity. There were these three examples, prefilled syringe, drug-coated mesh, and drug-eluting stent. The prefilled syringe is sort of prospective. If you're developing a prefilled syringe today, how do you address design controls? I think you could also use that example to look at, okay, let's say you've been making a prefilled syringe for 20, 30 years. How do you map your existing drug GMPs? How do you map what you might have submitted in your NDA to a design history file. I think that sort of information might be helpful to industry going forward, and sort of having that particular example, just because prefilled syringes are a big issue and a big part of the I think impact of the guidance. So I think something like that could be particularly helpful. Maybe to Barbara's point today, maybe that's a separate guidance, maybe that's a separate issue. But I think that's a potential clarifying area that could be of benefit to industry. So for convenience kits, one of the benefits of being a convenience kit, obviously, is that you're subject to very limited requirements. You're looking at assembly, packaging, labeling, sterilization. You're not worried about further design controls or anything like that. You're just putting things together, getting some duct tape or whatever, attaching things together. Actually, probably shouldn't use duct tape. Don't. I'm not an engineer. I'm a chemist, so no, you should take my advice on that. But a convenience kit is a product that is basically of this definition. It was from the preamble, as Bard mentioned, and it's legally marketed independently, and it's included in the kit, and it's already packaged for independent marketing, and with the same labeling that's required for independent marketing. And then I'd had this here. Is there any flexibility for convenience kits manufactured from bulk constituents without independent packaging and or labeling? And I was thinking about that actually as I was hearing the comments from FDA, and maybe part of the answer, I don't know if this is right, that the convenience kit's sort of a safe harbor. If you have the packaging and labeling, maybe I'll ask this question at 3:30. If you have the packaging and labeling, you combine them, you're in a safe place. If you're working in this situation here where something is not independently packaged and not independently labeled, and it's coming from a bulk source, you have to do a little more analysis to make sure. It doesn't mean necessarily you have to do a lot more work. It might be that you can make a co-packaged product without going through extensive design control work or extensive, further analysis, because you'll be able to leverage a lot of existing information. But there might be sort of that additional step that you need to do because of that. But I think, maybe going into a little more detail about where you have flexibility in, those situations where you're really close to being a convenience kit, but you're not quite there. Giving a little more clarity on that point would be helpful. And then around that point, too, there was an example in the guidance about, this was an example, I think, where you basically have like a dropper bottle. And I'm sorry, I'm misreading my example. I have a different order in my head. But this is about modifications to kits. And there was this line in here about otherwise modified for purpose of their inclusion in the kit. And this was an ambiguity, maybe just to me, but I was wondering what modified meant in this context, whether it meant just physical modifications to a constituent part, or whether it was actually talking about more sort of metaphysical modifications. Like if FDA was getting at something like, if you're combining two products and you have to evaluate whether there's been a change in intended use of some kind. I think getting some clarification on what exactly modified means in this context would be helpful, because I think that's sort of a little bit of a gray area there in terms of the kit, sort of the kit category. And this is the dispensing example I was thinking of. This is really, I think, a nice, clear example of a situation where you have a product, class 1 exempt, medication dispensing device. It's exempt, and it's very clear from the language in the guidance that, okay, the device constituent part is exempt. from pretty much any, for most device QSR requirements, and also all the requirements that you would need for a streamlined approach if you're using sort of the drug GMP-based streamlined approach. Therefore, Part 4 is not going to add any additional requirements. You're basically operating under drug GMPs effectively. And so it's basically a clear statement that if you're using this Class 1 exempt product, you're not going to be subject to any QSR requirements simply by including this product in the kit. Very clear statement, very helpful, I think, to industry because this is a very common scenario. But it's really just sort of applies to the sort of very simplest case of where you're just combining, like you're taking maybe the dosing cup and putting it atop of the Vicks NyQuil, which I was taking a lot of last night because I'm battling a cold and or allergies. But then you go you take a slight modification to this, and you go into the situation where you're making maybe like a dropper bottle, like you're incorporating the dropper, which is, again, is a simple liquid dosing device, and then you get into a situation where you're dealing with drug stability and release testing GMPs, which I think is completely understandable. You're putting this product into the drug, you're putting this sort of new plastic substance or glass or whatever it is into the drug products. So that makes sense. You have to consider the interactions with the drug products. Those drug GMPs would come into play. But then there's also this statement that there may need to be certain specifications for dosing the specific product and or maintaining its integrity while in contact with the drug product, and design controls for the specific use of the dropper, and also its contact that might need to be considered under design controls. And at the end of the day, it's not clear how different this would be than just having the dropper on the outside of the container. I mean, other than the sort of the drug part here, where you're, obviously there's going to be that interaction. There's the stability issue, and there's the potential, where you need to sort of evaluate the sort of extended contact, obviously. But beyond that, why not? I guess why is that issue so different where you need to start considering design controls? And I guess getting some more clarity on, I guess, what would make that situation different enough where design controls can come into play because of contact with the drug, or because of the drug delivery functionality, when if the dropper is just simply sitting outside of the container. I think that would be helpful to industry, just sort of understand better the agency's thinking around that point. Or at least it'd be helpful to me. I don't know. Another point that I think would be helpful to get clarity around is relationships. And there's a statement here. It says sponsors for co-packaged or single and A combo products that have a device constituent part must establish and maintain procedures for implementing CAPA in accordance with 82100. And I think what I was hearing today was, and maybe we'll get more additional clarity this afternoon, was that sponsors, and I think everyone does agree that sponsors, the market authorization holders, have the ultimate responsibility for the products they put out on the market. But I think there's also situations where they wouldn't necessarily have their own CAPA system. If they're like a virtual manufacturer that has, they hold the marketing authorization, they might be contracting everything out. They'll have to have supplier controls. They'll have quality agreements. They'll have oversight functions, but they might not have their own specific CAPA system. They'll have oversight to ensure whoever their manufacturer is has a good CAPA system. And so I think maybe clarifying that the market authorization holders are responsible for assuring the products made in compliance with Part 4 might be a better phrasing of this, if that was the intent, to ensure that there's this compliance with that and compliance with, CAPAs and everything else, but not necessarily that they have those actual systems in place. It's just a matter of them making sure that whoever's doing the manufacturing has the necessary systems. Another point that we discussed a lot when we were working on this was cross-labeled combination products. And there is some very good, I think, helpful guidance in the document about cross-labeled combination products and how the two entities that are making the different products would interact with one another. And I think in large part it reflects how a large segment of the industry operates. There is a lot of coordination where you have true cross-labeled combination products. That is where the two products cannot be used safely and effectively unless they're used together. However, I don't think that Part 4 actually applies to that. I think it's, by its terms, just by the first section 4.1, it applies to co-packaged and single entity products. And so I think just as a matter of clarification, I think it's helpful to have this information out there to just sort of reinforce, maybe as a best practice. It's helpful to have these sort of mechanisms for coordination between folks that are cross-labeling products that are actually cross-labeled combination products. But I think it's also helpful to clarify this isn't necessarily a regulatory requirement. And I think that's in there, in the guidance. There are references in certain sections that emphasize, this is about, the requirements apply to co-packaged and single entity products. But I just think a clear statement about, just in this section that explains, we're not talking about Part 4 requirements, we're just talking about, practices that are a good idea. Would be a helpful clarification, just so there isn't any confusion within the industry about the extent of Part 4. Unless I'm confused about the extent of Part 4, that's another issue. Leveraging device constituents. This is just another positive that we saw come out of the guidance. Again, it just goes back to this concept of leveraging previous learnings. Again, the idea of using the same or similar components and taking what was learned in their development in further developing a combination product. It's a great idea, and it's a simple idea, and it's a great idea, and it's something we want to see in guidance, and it's something that's helpful to be reinforced in documents. So we think that's also a very positive thing that came out of the draft. And then for some other topics, and these are just sort of some points of clarification, just other things that we really liked when we were taking a look at the guidance. One was drug delivery. This is a small point, but I think an important one. Just the meaning of the word delivers. I think that the intent here is direct delivery to the patient. It's not about transfers that eventually lead to administration, like taking a drug, putting it somewhere else, and then giving it to the patient. It's not about like an aspirin bottle, or if I'm taking a Claritin or two, popping it out of the little foil backing. It's about droppers or dosing cups or syringes. It's about something that's going to take the drug and it's intended to get it right into the patient without some sort of intermediate step. And I think having that clarification in there, it's a small thing, but I think it would be helpful just so there isn't any confusion down the road about what drug delivery means. For stability testing, this is something that came up with regards just to the statement that the for a single entity combination product, testing must be performed on the drug constituent part in the finished combination product. And so, we're thinking, are there any situations where you don't need to use actually the finished combination product? And maybe the answer here, so I was just trying to think of a scenario where you might have something that's not precisely finished but is close enough that you're going to get what you need for stability testing. So for this example here, it's an encapsulated container like a vial that gets integrated into another device in such a way that you might actually consider it a single entity product, but you could really just sort of look at the vial itself and say, well, we can just hold this on stability. We don't need to hold the rest of the device. I'm just trying to think, and this actually, I guess, will probably go also to the issue of reserve samples and other things. I mean, just sort of thinking about flexibility and creative ways of trying to minimize the burden of different sorts of testing that's required. Obviously, you want to have enough to ensure that the product is stable and safe and effective, but at the same time, there are lots of different ways to skin a cat. You know, is it really necessary in every case that it be the finished combination product, or are there situations where you could say maybe it requires a regulatory waiver of certain requirements, but there are cases where you say, you know, actually in this situation we could say, you know, it's close enough that you actually don't need to have the finished combination product. You can take this subpart of it. I think maybe having the guidance acknowledge that, or acknowledging even there is a waiver process, could be something that would be helpful to industry as they're sort of trying to figure out how to manage some of these issues. I know we heard today there are certain situations, just in the context of reserve samples, where FDA recognizes that just as a practical matter, things, you know, things need to be adjusted. I think the same might hold true for stability. But that's just another consideration, and just goes with the must word. Maybe it's a should, and you know, in certain limited situations, maybe there's a alternative approach. Components versus constituent parts. This is just something we all really liked. It's an issue that comes up sometimes in regulatory roundtable discussions about the distinction between components versus constituent parts and finished versus unfinished devices. And just there's a really nice discussion of the clarity, or that gave clarity between those distinctions, and that we really liked. So that was really nice to see in the guidance. For design controls for investigational products, there's a statement that talks about the application of design controls for devices that are also investigational combination products. So if they're being integrated into a combination product as part of a device, subject to design controls, which you understand. And I guess one of the comments we had, or thoughts for helpful clarification, would be it would be helpful to know sort of what design controls might look like in sort of like a phase 1 early trial. You know, we're not expecting that design controls would necessarily look the same in that stage of development as they would in the, you know, to be marketed phase of development. I mean, obviously you'd need to have enough design controls to have assurance, for safety, that you're going to be delivering the right dose of product, so your study results are valid. But there are going to be, there might also be more flexibility at that stage. And maybe having some more discussion around that point would be helpful. Again, maybe that's an area where that's a separate guidance or a separate issue that, gets addressed. But I think something like that was a topic of discussion when we were talking about the guidance, and I think could bear some clarification. And then this last part, complying with biological and HCTP requirements for combo products. It was just really good. This is a simple comment. It was just a good overview. I think it was nice to see it addressed in the guidance. It's it's an important area. We recognize that there were, at the end, there were references to call OCPO specific inquiries, because we know there are lots of special nuances in that particular area, which we appreciate. But yeah, overall, it's a really good overview of the particular issues with those products. So kudos on that.